I never believed the rumors about my school being haunted until that night. It was a regular Friday evening. Everyone had gone home, and the school corridors stood silent, bathed in the pale glow of the flickering hallway lights. I had stayed behind to finish a history project in the library. The old school building had always felt strange, with its creaking floors and the constant hum of the old ventilation system. But that night, something felt different. The silence wasn't just quiet. It felt heavy, pressing against my chest as I packed my books. Then I heard it. Ding, dong. The school bell. It echoed through the empty hallways, loud and clear. But it didn't make sense. The bell hadn't rung all evening, and it was way past school hours. Maybe a janitor was working late, or a prank. I stepped into the dim hallway, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. The entire school felt wrong. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, and the air was colder than usual. I could feel it, like I was being watched. I kept walking toward the front entrance when... Ding dong! The bell rang again, louder this time. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from the main bell above the entrance. It was echoing from the old wing, the part of the school that had been shut down for years. No one was supposed to go there. For a moment, I thought of leaving. My car was parked right outside. But curiosity gnawed at me. Why was the bell ringing from a part of the school that had been locked for so long? I turned back, heart pounding, and took a step toward the dark corridor leading to the old wing. The sound of the bell seemed to be calling me. As I stepped closer to the old wing, the dim lights above flickered, casting long, restless shadows on the cracked tile floor. My breath felt heavy, and the faint scent of damp paper and dust filled the air. I remembered hearing stories about this part of the school, how it had been sealed off years ago after a terrible accident. No one really talked about it anymore, but there were whispers of a student who never left. Ding, dong. The bell rang again, louder this time, but slower, almost as if it was calling. I reached the double doors leading to the old wing. They were rusted, chained shut. But when I pressed my hand against the cold metal, the chain slid loose, like it had been waiting. The doors creaked open with a low groan, revealing a hallway untouched for years. The air felt heavier here. The lockers were old, paint peeling, the glass windows clouded with grime. As I moved deeper, my footsteps echoed unnaturally, as if the space around me was larger than it should have been. Suddenly, I noticed something odd. An old class schedule pinned to a corkboard. The date was from over a decade ago. The last class listed? Music theory, room 109. The bell rang again. Ding dong. Room 109. I could see the door just ahead, slightly ajar. My pulse raced, but something else caught my eye first. An old yearbook lying open on the floor beneath the board. The pages were yellowed, brittle. I knelt down and brushed the dust aside, my fingers trembling. There, circled in red ink, was the picture of a girl. No name, just the caption, "Never forgotten." As I stared at the faded image, I felt it. A presence. The air shifted behind me, cold and thick. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. Still, I felt certain I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the lights above room 109 flickered violently, then went out completely. Ding, dong. The bell rang again, louder, deeper, almost vibrating through the walls. I took a step closer to the door, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, abandoned classroom. And then I saw it. An old school bell sitting right in the center of the teacher's desk. Dust covered everything in the room, except the bell. It was spotless, polished. Before I could process it, the door behind me slammed shut. The bell rang once more, but this time, I swore I could hear something underneath the sound. A voice, faint, distant, whispering my name. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang, plunging the room into an unnatural silence. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around, heart hammering against my chest. The faint scent of old paper and damp wood had shifted. Now the air felt icy, charged with something wrong. The bell sat on the desk, motionless, yet the ringing continued. Ding, dong, but this time, the sound wasn't echoing from the bell on the desk. It was coming from somewhere deeper. Suddenly, the whispering returned, clearer now. Help me. I stumbled back, my hand brushing against the chalkboard. The dust smeared beneath my fingers, but beneath the old writing, something new was scratched into the surface. 109. Still here. My stomach twisted. Room 109. But I was already in room 109. The whispering grew louder. It wasn't just one voice anymore. Multiple voices, soft, desperate. They seemed to be pressing against the walls, echoing from every corner of the dark classroom. The bell rang again, louder, sharper. Ding! Dong! And then the bell on the desk moved. It shifted an inch, scraping against the wood with a sharp, piercing sound. I backed away, pressing against the chalkboard, my pulse racing. But before I could react, the bell lifted. It hovered, trembling in the air, then suddenly dropped. Clang! The noise exploded, shaking the entire room as the whispers turned into a chorus of pained cries. The classroom windows rattled violently. Desks scraped across the floor as if invisible hands were pushing them aside. My head spun, and I could feel the overwhelming pressure closing in, like something was trying to break through. Let me out. The voice was no longer soft. It was screaming, desperate, angry. Suddenly, the old yearbook I had seen earlier appeared on the desk. But this time, the pages were flipping on their own. The same picture of the girl appeared, only now, the red ink around her face was dripping, like fresh blood. The bell rang again, more chaotic now. Ding, dong, ding, dong. The lights flickered violently, casting long shadows that danced unnaturally along the walls. And then I saw her. A figure, pale and translucent, emerged near the windows. A young girl in a tattered school uniform. Her face was hollow, eyes dark voids, yet filled with sorrow. You have to stop the bell. Please, before it's too late. Her voice trembled, barely audible above the chaos. I staggered toward the bell, my hands trembling. But the closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like invisible hands were pulling me back. Don't let it ring 12 times. It will open the door. She whispered. I looked at the clock. The bell had rung 11 times. Suddenly, the bell lifted on its own again. My body froze. One more ring. Just one more. And the door would open. To what? I didn't want to find out. The bell hovered in midair, trembling, as if caught between two forces. I could feel it. Something ancient, powerful, pressing against the walls of reality. The 12th ring was coming. Stop it! The girl screamed, her voice echoing with both fear and pain. I lunged forward, heart pounding, and grabbed the bell with both hands. The icy cold metal burned against my skin, but I didn't let go. The bell fought back, vibrating violently in my grip. "You can't hold it forever." A voice hissed from the shadows, deeper, colder than the girls. The lights above exploded with a crackling burst. Glass rained down as the entire room was consumed in darkness, save for a dim, unnatural glow radiating from the bell itself. The 12th ring was building inside it. I could feel the sound trapped, desperate to escape. The girl appeared again, her pale figure flickering like static. Tears streamed down her hollow cheeks. "You have to break it. Now." I raised the bell above my head, trembling with effort, and slammed it down onto the desk. Crack. The sound was deafening. A surge of cold air rushed through the room, and the bell split down the middle with a sharp, echoing crack. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the girl's figure began to fade, her face finally at peace. She whispered, "Thank you," before dissolving completely. I exhaled, shaking, believing it was over. But then, the clock on the wall ticked. 12 a.m. The broken bell lying in two halves on the desk suddenly shifted. One half twitched, then began to fuse back together. The crack sealed itself, the metal gleaming, as if untouched. And then faintly, impossibly, ding, dong. The 12th ring had sounded. Somewhere deep in the old wing, a door creaked open. The real horror was just beginning. The wind howled through the trees as the old school loomed in front of the protagonist, standing tall and forgotten on the edge of town. Its weathered bricks and broken windows were like scars of a past that no one wanted to remember. The once vibrant playground, now overgrown with weeds, stood in eerie silence. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the sun seemed reluctant to shine through the heavy clouds that perpetually hung over the building. This school, built over a century ago, had always been a place of whispers and secrets. It had closed down abruptly many years ago, after a series of mysterious events, disappearances, strange sounds, and the most unsettling of all, the bell that rang by itself. The bell tower, still intact despite years of neglect, had become a symbol of the eerie events that plagued the school. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning curious souls to stay away. But for the protagonist, this place was irresistible, a puzzle waiting to be solved. With a shaky breath, they pushed open the rusted gates and walked toward the front door, which creaked loudly as it swung open with an unsettling ease. The moment they stepped inside, the air turned colder, and the hairs on the back of their necks stood up. The floorboards groaned under their weight, as though the building itself was aware of their presence. Dust particles floated in the dim light, filtering through the broken windows, creating a ghostly atmosphere. The faint smell of old chalk and forgotten textbooks lingered in the air. A sense of foreboding hung heavy over the building. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the sound of their own footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Every corner seemed to hold a secret. Every shadow stretched long and ominous, but it was the bell, ringing faintly in the distance, that truly sent a chill down their spine. As the bell's echo reverberated through the hall, the protagonist felt a strange unease. It wasn't supposed to ring. The school had been abandoned for years, and the bell tower had long since stopped working. But the bell, it was ringing now, as if calling them, beckoning them closer, into the heart of the school's dark past. The protagonist hesitated, standing in the dim hallway, trying to steady their breath. The echo of the bell still hung in the air, its reverberations sending an inexplicable shiver down their spine. There were no other sounds. The school, once bustling with the energy of children, was now eerily still. And yet the bell had rung. It wasn't a simple chime or a loud toll, but a soft, almost mournful ringing. Just enough to draw attention, but not enough to explain why it was happening. The protagonist stood frozen for a moment, as if waiting for the bell to ring again. But nothing happened. Silence. Curiosity, mixed with a rising sense of dread, nudged them forward. They turned to the left, toward the old classroom doors. The handle was cold under their fingers as they twisted it open, revealing a dark room covered in dust and cobwebs. The windows were boarded up, leaving the space bathed in darkness, save for the faint light seeping through cracks in the wood. As they stepped inside, the floor creaked underfoot, and a strange, musty odor filled the air. The chalkboard, covered in layers of grime, was barely visible, as were the rows of old wooden desks that looked as if they hadn't been touched in years. Yet something felt off. The room felt too alive with history, as though it held memories too strong to fade. The bell rang again. A sharp, sudden toll, louder than before. It came from the direction of the stairwell leading up to the bell tower. The protagonist jumped, heart pounding in their chest. It couldn't be. The bell was supposed to be broken. Everyone knew that. No one had touched the bell in years. They made their way toward the stairwell at the back of the room, a thick layer of dust covering the railing. The stairs creaked under their feet with every step, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. As they climbed higher, the temperature seemed to drop, and a cold draft blew through the narrow space, making the hair on the back of their neck stand on end. At the top of the stairs, they reached a small landing. The door to the bell tower loomed ahead, its heavy wood warped by years of neglect. The bell rang again, and this time it sounded almost like a whisper, as if someone was calling them. With trembling hands, the protagonist reached for the sensation of being watched crept over them, and for a moment they felt paralyzed by fear. But then, in the silence that followed, something else happened. The floor beneath their feet trembled slightly. It wasn't an earthquake, nor was it the wind. It felt like something, or someone, was moving below them, shifting in the shadows of the tower. The bell stopped ringing suddenly, as if whatever had caused it had vanished, leaving only the unsettling stillness behind. The protagonist quickly turned to leave, but as they reached the top of the stairs, they felt a cold breath on the back of their neck. A whisper, barely audible, drifted through the air. "Leave, now." The protagonist rushed down the stairs, heart racing, the echo of the whisper still ringing in their ears. The air around them felt thick with something dark and unspoken. The bell had stopped, but the eerie silence that followed was just as unsettling. They barely had time to catch their breath before another sound broke through, the distinct clinking of chains. It was coming from the bell tower. Frozen at the foot of the stairs, the protagonist's mind raced. It couldn't be the wind. This place was old, abandoned. Yet the sound continued, louder now, as if the chains were being pulled by an unseen force. The sensation of being watched pressed heavily on their chest, like a cold, invisible hand. "Who's there?" the protagonist called out, their voice shaking as it bounced off the walls of the empty school. No response, just silence. The oppressive stillness seemed to swallow their words, making them feel small and insignificant. A chill ran down their spine as they noticed something strange. A trail of footprints in the dust, leading away from the stairwell and toward the hallway. They hadn't seen those footprints before. The dust had been undisturbed when they entered. But now, there they were, perfectly shaped, as though someone had walked through the school only moments ago. The footsteps didn't seem to follow a clear path. They were erratic, turning sharply at corners and stopping abruptly, only to start again. It felt wrong, unnatural. The protagonist followed the trail hesitantly, each step taken with a growing sense of dread. The footsteps led them deeper into the school, past classrooms that seemed to watch them with empty eyes, toward the back of the building, where an old, disused janitor's closet stood. The door to the closet was slightly ajar, and as the protagonist approached, the unmistakable sound of the bell echoed once again, this time louder than in before. The bell was ringing, but it didn't seem to be coming from the bell tower. The sound was all around them, as if it was coming from the very walls. With a trembling hand, the protagonist pushed open the janitor's closet door. The room inside was small, filled with old cleaning supplies, broken mops, and abandoned buckets. But what caught their attention wasn't the clutter. It was the old rusted bell sitting in the corner. The bell was smaller than the one in the tower, but it was unmistakably old, covered in dust and cobwebs. It looked out of place in the closet, almost like it had been placed there deliberately. The protagonist stepped closer, their breath shallow. Why would the bell be here? It didn't make sense. The larger bell in the tower had been the source of all the strange occurrences. But this bell, something about it felt wrong. Suddenly, the bell rang again, clear and sharp, as if it had been struck with great force. The protagonist recoiled, heart pounding. The sound was deafening, reverberating through the entire building. And then, as quickly as it had started, the ringing stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. A strange noise broke the silence then. A scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. It was coming from the back of the closet. The protagonist spun around, but the room was empty. Nothing was there, except the bell, now silent once again. Panic rose in their chest. They needed to leave. Whatever was happening here, whatever presence lingered in the walls of this forgotten school, it was dangerous. The footsteps outside the closet seemed to grow louder, as though someone, or something, was closing in. The bell rang again, but this time it was different. It didn't come from the tower or the closet. It seemed to come from within the walls themselves, deep and distant, as if the building itself was alive and calling out. The sound filled the entire school, wrapping around the protagonist like a noose, tightening with every passing second. Frantic, the protagonist backed away from the darkness consumed the bell tower, swallowing the protagonist whole. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. A suffocating, absolute silence. The temperature continued to plummet. The cold so sharp that it felt like the very air was frozen in time. The figure in the shadows, pale and skeletal, loomed over them, its glowing eyes piercing through the pitch-black room. The protagonist's breath came in shallow gasps, their heart racing, thudding in their chest like a drum. The bell had stopped ringing, but the silence felt like a living thing, suffocating and pressing in from all sides. And then a voice broke the stillness, cold and rasping, reverberating through the tower like a low growl. "You freed me," the figure whispered. Its voice was like 1,000 whispers, layered and faint, yet somehow impossibly clear. "Now you must pay the price." The words sent a cold shiver down the protagonist's spine. This was no ordinary ghost, no simple apparition. This was something ancient, something that had been bound to the bell for centuries, waiting for the right moment to be freed. And now that it was free, it had found them. The figure stepped closer, its form still cloaked in darkness. But there was a sudden shift, a flicker in the shadows. The bell, now silent but still ominously present, seemed to hum with energy, vibrating with a force the protagonists could feel in their bones. It was like the bell was alive, working in tandem with the figure. The two were connected, bound by some ancient magic that the protagonist could not understand. "Who are you?" the protagonist managed to whisper, their voice barely audible against the growing hum of the bell. They wanted to flee, to escape, but their legs refused to move. The oppressive cold wrapped around them like chains. The figure's glowing eyes narrowed, and the air around them seemed to crackle. "I am the keeper," it said slowly, its voice like the sound of old brittle paper tearing. "I was bound to the bell, to guard the secrets of this place. But now I am free, because of you." The protagonist's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out. The bell had been the source of all these horrors, the ringing, the whispers, the strange occurrences. But now, with the figure standing before them, everything seemed to have changed. It wasn't just the bell that was cursed. The bell was a key that had unlocked something far darker. "Why me?" the protagonist asked, their voice trembling. "Why did you choose me?" The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes gleaming in the darkness. "You were curious. You sought the truth, and the truth has brought you here, to me." And then, as if in answer, the bell rang once more, louder than it ever had before, a deafening, bone-shaking toll that seemed to resonate from the very foundations of the building. The sound seemed to twist and bend, as though the bell was calling not just to the protagonist, but to something else, something far more sinister. The figure's lips twisted into a grin, a dark, knowing smile that sent a surge of dread coursing through the protagonist's veins. "You think you've found the truth? But there is more. The bell does not merely summon spirits. It calls those who seek answers, those who search too deeply. And now you will become part of it." The bell's toll grew louder still, reverberating through the school, through the very walls themselves. The protagonist's vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness swept over them. The shadows seemed to deepen, swallowing the room whole. The figure's form began to warp, its face shifting and distorting, as if it were made of smoke. Suddenly, everything stopped. The bell ceased its ringing, the shadow stopped shifting. The oppressive cold melted away, replaced by an eerie warmth. The figure, now a mere silhouette, smiled, its glowing eyes dimming. "You were never meant to leave." The protagonist blinked, dazed, and for a moment they couldn't understand what was happening. They were standing outside. The school was behind them, the gates open, the sky clear. The bell tower was no longer in view. Everything seemed normal, but then, as they looked down, a cold realization swept over them. They were no longer themselves. The body they inhabited was not their own. Their hands were pale and skeletal, their fingers long, and twisted. Their reflection in a nearby broken window showed a face, but it wasn't their face. It was the face of the figure, the keeper, its glowing eyes staring back at them. And then the bell rang again, distant and faint. A quiet echo, but it was unmistakable. The cycle had begun again. The protagonist was now part of the bell, part of the curse that had claimed so many before them.